Octavia Mercer was kneeling in the middle of a Milwaukee street in 20-degree weather, holding a stranger's hand so he wouldn't die alone on the asphalt. Horns blared behind her. Nobody stopped. People leaned out of their windows and yelled at her to move. One driver even filmed her on his phone instead of helping. And right when she thought she'd have to drag the old man herself, a car door slammed somewhere behind her, and a man in a coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent ran straight into traffic and dropped down on his knees beside her. She had no idea that man's last name would soon turn her whole world upside down. But let's back up. Because to understand how Octavia Mercer ended up kneeling on a frozen street holding a stranger's hand, you have to understand everything she lost before that morning ever happened. This is a story about pride, betrayal, and a love that almost didn't survive the truth. Stay with us till the end, because this story will make you think twice about judging people by what they have or what they've lost. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you do not want to miss any detail of this story. Now let's get into it. 3 years earlier, Octavia Mercer had a different life completely. She grew up in Asheville, North Carolina, in a house with a wraparound porch and a father who whistled old gospel songs while he made pancakes on Saturday mornings. Her father, Walter Mercer, ran a small but respected investment firm that worked with bigger agricultural companies across the country. He wasn't flashy. He drove a regular sedan even after he could afford better. But he was good at his job, and for almost 20 years, Mercer Capital Partners had a clean name and a steady client list. Octavia studied business in college because she wanted to work alongside her father one day. She used to sit in his office during summer breaks, watching him talk on the phone with partners and clients, learning how he negotiated, how he stayed calm even when numbers got tense. Then, when Octavia was 23, everything fell apart. A massive agricultural holding company up in Wisconsin called Castellan and Vance had brought Mercer Capital Partners into a major deal. It looked like the opportunity of a lifetime. Walter Mercer put almost everything the firm had into it, trusting the bigger company's numbers, trusting their word. The deal collapsed within 8 months, and when it collapsed, Castellan and Vance walked away mostly unharmed. They were too big, too protected, too well lawyered. But Mercer Capital Partners, a small firm that had bet everything on that single deal, did not survive. Walter Mercer lost his clients, his savings, his office, and slowly, piece by piece, his spirit. Octavia watched her father go from a man who whistled gospel songs in the kitchen to a man who sat quietly at the table for hours, staring at nothing. They sold the house with the wraparound porch. They sold the sedan he loved. Within a year, Walter Mercer was working as a part-time bookkeeper for a small hardware store, doing math that used to be beneath him. Octavia never forgot the name of the company that did it, Castellan and Vance. She moved to Milwaukee 2 years later, partly because rent was cheaper there, and partly because a tiny part of her, the part she never told anyone about, wanted to be close to the company that had ruined her family. She didn't have a plan. She just wanted to see the building. She wanted to know what the place looked like that had taken her father's whole life's work and barely blinked. She got 2 jobs instead. A diner job during the day, and 3 evenings a week. She took care of an elderly woman named Miss Dorothy who lived 2 floors above her in a rundown apartment building on the north side of the city. Miss Dorothy had no children of her own, and Octavia had grown fond of her in a way that felt like family, the kind of family she didn't realize she missed until she found it again in someone else's grandmother. That brings us to the morning everything changed. It was a Tuesday, the middle of January, the kind of cold that bites through 3 layers of clothing like they're nothing. Octavia was walking to her diner shift when she saw an elderly man, a stranger she had never met before, stumble at the crosswalk near 4th Street and collapse onto the road. She didn't think. She just ran. By the time she reached him, his lips had gone a little blue, and he was mumbling something about his chest hurting. Octavia immediately knelt down, checked his breathing, and held his hand so he wouldn't panic. "Sir, I need you to stay with me, okay?" Octavia said firmly, pulling out her phone with her free hand. "I'm calling for help right now. You're going to be fine." Cars kept honking. One driver yelled out his window that she needed to move because she was, quote, blocking traffic. Octavia didn't even look up at him. "Somebody call 911. She shouted at the crowd of people who had stopped to watch but not to help. That's when a car door slammed somewhere behind her, fast and hard, like someone had thrown it open without even putting the car in park properly. A man came running straight into the middle of the road, dodging a car that had to swerve to avoid him, and dropped down on his knees right next to Octavia. "I already called it in," he said, breathing hard from the run. "Ambulance is 4 minutes out." Octavia looked at him properly for the first time. He looked completely out of place kneeling on a dirty, salted street. His coat was the kind of coat people wear in magazines, not real life. His shoes were polished. But none of that seemed to matter to him in that moment because he was already taking off his coat and laying it gently under the old man's head like it was the most normal thing in the world. "What's his name?" the man asked her. "I don't know, I just met him," Octavia said. "He just collapsed right in front of me. Sir, can you hear us?" the man asked the old man gently. "Help is coming, just hang in there with us." The old man's eyes fluttered open weakly. "My grandson," he whispered. "He works at the bakery on 6th. Somebody call him." Octavia immediately searched the man's coat pocket and found a worn wallet with a faded photograph of a young man standing in front of a bakery. She found the number on a card tucked behind the photo and called it right there on the street, while the stranger kept talking softly to the old man, keeping him calm, keeping him present. By the time the ambulance arrived, the old man was conscious and stable, and his grandson came running from the bakery 2 minutes later, nearly knocking Octavia over with a hug of gratitude she didn't expect. After the ambulance pulled away, Octavia finally stood up, brushing the cold pavement dust off her jeans, and turned to face the man who had run into traffic without even thinking about it. He was still holding his now ruined dirty coat in his hands, looking at it like he didn't even care that it was probably worth more than everything in her closet combined. "That was a good thing you did back there," Octavia said. "You did it first," he said simply. "I just followed your lead." She studied him for a second. There was something different about him, something she couldn't quite name. He didn't look like he belonged on a freezing Milwaukee street corner. He looked like he belonged somewhere far more polished, somewhere with marble floors and assistants holding doors open for him. "Romaine," he said, holding out his hand. "Octavia," she said, shaking it. His grip was warm despite the cold. Firm, but not trying to prove anything with it. She noticed his hands didn't look like a man who'd ever done hard labor in his life, smooth, well-kept, but right now, slightly scraped from kneeling on the salted street. "Going to be late for wherever you were going," Octavia said, nodding toward his abandoned car, which was now blocking half the street with its door still wide open and hazard lights blinking. Romaine looked back at the car like he had completely forgotten it existed. "Yes," he said slowly. "I probably am." But he didn't move to leave. He just stood there for a moment, looking at her like he was trying to figure something out, the same way you look at a puzzle piece that doesn't seem to belong with the rest of the box, but somehow fits perfectly anyway. "Do you come through here often?" Romaine asked. "Every day. I work at the diner 2 blocks down." Octavia pointed in the direction. "Sunrise Diner. You can't miss it. The sign's missing the letter U, so it just says a sunrise." That actually got a small laugh out of him, the first real laugh she'd see from him, though far from the last. "A sunrise diner," he repeated. "I'll remember that." "You say that like you're actually going to show up," Octavia said, raising an eyebrow. "Maybe I will," Romaine said. And with that, he walked back to his still-running car, looking back once before he got inside, like he wanted to make sure the moment had actually happened and he hadn't just imagined the whole thing. Octavia stood there a second longer, watching him drive off, before shaking her head at herself and continuing on to her shift. She told herself she wasn't going to think about it again. Rich men in expensive coats didn't actually come back. They had assistants and meetings and lives that didn't include diners with broken signs. She was wrong. And she had no idea just how wrong she was about to be. What Octavia didn't know was who exactly Romaine was rushing to meet that morning, and what would have happened if he had missed it. Romaine Castellan was the only son and heir of Castellan and Vance Agricultural Holdings, one of the largest privately held agricultural companies in the entire country, worth well over $4 billion. His father, Desmond Castellan, had built the company from a single grain distribution business into an empire that touched supply chains across the whole nation. And Desmond expected his son to run that empire exactly the way he had built it. No softness, no mistakes, no distractions, That morning, Romain had been on his way to a meeting that would finalize a major new partnership deal, the kind of deal that made headlines and made shareholders happy. He was already running late because of gridlock traffic, and when he saw the chaos at the crosswalk, something in him simply couldn't keep driving past it. He didn't plan to stop. His body just moved before his mind could talk him out of it. He arrived at the meeting 23 minutes late, his dress shirt slightly wrinkled, his hands still faintly smelling like asphalt and cold air. His father was not happy. 23 minutes, Romain, Desmond said coldly after the meeting ended, both of them standing alone in the glass-walled boardroom on the 40th floor. Do you understand what that says to people? It says you don't value their time. It says you're not serious. An old man almost died on the street, Dad, Romain said. I stopped to help. Desmond looked at him the way he always did when he thought his son was being naive, a tired, disappointed look that Romain had seen his whole life. There will always be someone who needs help, son. You cannot save every stranger on every street corner. You have a company to run. People are counting on you to be sharp, not soft. Romain didn't argue. He never did with his father. It never worked. But that night, lying awake in his enormous, quiet apartment on the top floor of a building he technically owned a piece of, Romain kept thinking about the woman who had knelt down in the middle of a busy street for a complete stranger, without hesitating for even a second, without caring who was watching or what it cost her. He thought about the way she had looked up at him, not impressed by his coat or his car, but simply asking if he was going to help or not. Nobody had looked at him like that in years, like he was just a person, not an heir, not a name, just a person who could either help or not. He thought about the diner with the broken sign. He told himself he had 100 reasons not to go back. His schedule was packed for the next 2 weeks. His father was already watching him more closely after the morning's lateness. And there was an unspoken rule in his world that you simply did not go wandering into diners on the working-class side of town. Not when you were the face of a $4 billion company. Not when every move you made could end up in a business magazine somewhere. But 3 days later, on a quiet Friday morning, Romain found himself sitting in a small booth at Sunrise Diner, the one with the broken neon sign, completely out of place in his tailored coat, holding a menu he didn't actually need because he had already decided he was only there for one reason. He was there to see if she'd remember him. Well, look who actually showed up, Octavia said when she walked over with a coffee pot in her hand, raising an eyebrow at him like she still didn't quite believe it. I told you I would, Romain said. MHM. Rich men say a lot of things. Octavia poured him a cup of coffee without asking if he wanted one. What can I get you? Fair warning, the pancakes here are better than anything you've eaten downtown, and I will be personally offended if you don't believe me. Then I'll have the pancakes, Romain said, smiling for real this time, an easy smile that surprised even him with how natural it felt. How's the old man doing, the one from the street? Octavia's expression softened. He's good, actually, stable. His grandson came by here yesterday to thank me again, brought me a loaf of bread from the bakery. She tilted her head at him. You should be glad you ran into traffic that day, helped your karma a little. My karma needed the help, Romain said. That bad, huh? You have no idea, Romain said, and something in his voice made Octavia pause for half a second, like she had caught the edge of something real underneath the joke. She didn't push. Not yet. She just wrote his order down and walked off toward the kitchen, leaving Romain sitting alone in the booth, looking around at the chipped paint on the walls, the mismatched chairs, the regulars who clearly knew each other by name, and feeling something he hadn't felt in a long, long time inside the cold marble walls of his own company. He felt like he was somewhere real. He came back the next week, and the week after that. Each time, he told himself it was just for the pancakes, just to check on the old man's recovery, just because the coffee was surprisingly good for a diner with a broken sign. But Octavia was starting to notice something too, something she wasn't ready to admit to herself just yet. There was a man who kept showing up in her diner wearing clothes that didn't belong there, asking about her day like he actually wanted to know the answer, laughing at her jokes like they were the funniest things he'd heard all year. And neither of them knew that across town, in a glass office on the 40th floor of Castellan Tower, someone else had just noticed something far more dangerous. Romain's younger sister, Sienna Castellan, sharp-tongued and impossible to fool, had been going through old archived company files for an unrelated audit when a name jumped out at her from a list of failed partnership deals from years earlier. Mercer Capital Partners. And right below it, a name she recognized instantly from a recent calendar reminder she'd seen on her brother's phone screen without meaning to: Octavia Mercer. Sienna sat back slowly in her chair, staring at the screen, a slow and uneasy feeling building in her chest as the pieces started to connect themselves whether she wanted them to or not. "Oh no," she whispered to herself. "Romaine, what have you gotten yourself into?" She picked up her phone immediately and called her brother. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail again. Sienna stared at the files on her screen one more time, then closed her laptop slowly, her mind racing through everything this could mean for her brother, for the company, and for a woman who had absolutely no idea that the man buying pancakes from her every week was the son of the very company that had destroyed her entire family. This was not going to end quietly, and somebody was about to get hurt. If this story already has you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now and drop a comment telling me who you think should find out the truth first, Octavia or Romaine. Subscribe so you don't miss any part of the story, because trust me, what happens next is going to break your heart before it puts it back together. Sienna Castellan sat in her car outside Sunrise Diner for almost 10 full minutes before she found the courage to walk inside. She had tried calling her brother 6 times since she found those files. Every single call had gone straight to voicemail. So now here she was, on a Friday afternoon, about to do something she swore she would never do: interfere in her brother's personal life. But this wasn't just personal anymore. This was a landmine, and Romaine was walking straight toward it with his eyes closed. Romaine Castellan, heir to a $4 billion agricultural empire, had been secretly visiting a small diner every week to see a woman named Octavia Mercer, completely unaware that his family's company was the exact reason her father lost everything. His sister Sienna just discovered the connection, and she is not about to sit quietly on this information. And remember, if you enjoy stories like this, make sure you're subscribed, because things are about to get very complicated. Sienna pushed open the diner door and spotted her brother immediately, sitting in a corner booth, laughing at something the waitress had just said. He looked relaxed in a way Sienna hadn't seen in years, lighter somehow, like a man who had set something heavy down for an hour. She almost felt bad about what she was about to do. "Ramen," Sienna said, walking straight up to the booth. Romaine's smile dropped slightly when he saw his sister's face. Sienna never showed up uninvited unless something was wrong. "Sienna. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you. Now, outside." Octavia, who had been standing at the table with the coffee pot still in her hand, looked between the two of them, picking up on the tension immediately. "Give you 2 a minute," Octavia said carefully, stepping away. Once they were outside on the sidewalk, away from the windows, Sienna didn't waste any time. "Do you know who that woman is?" she asked. "Her name is Octavia. She works here." "Why are you acting like this is a crime scene?" "Ramen, her last name is Mercer." Sienna watched her brother's face for recognition and saw none. "As in Mercer Capital Partners, as in the company Dad's deal destroyed 8 years ago." Ramen went very still. "That can't be the same Mercer," he said slowly. "There's probably 100 families with that last name in this state alone." "Pulled the old files this morning, Romaine. Walter Mercer ran that firm. He had a daughter, Octavia Mercer. It's her." "It's the same family." Sienna's voice softened slightly, seeing the look on her brother's face. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you because you need to know before this goes any further. Before you fall for someone who might hate our entire family once she finds out who you really are." Ramen looked back through the diner window. Octavia was wiping down a table, laughing with an old regular customer about something, completely unaware that her entire world was sitting just outside on the sidewalk, debating whether or not to tell her the truth. "I haven't even told her my last name," Romaine admitted quietly. Sienna's eyebrows shot up. "Why not?" "Because for the first time in years, somebody was talking to me like I was just a regular person. Not an heir, not a name on a building, just me." Romaine ran a hand over his face. "I didn't want that to end." "Ramen, it has to end at some point. Either you tell her, or she finds out on her own, and trust me, the second one is going to be so much worse." Ramen didn't answer right away. He just stood there on the cold sidewalk, staring through the glass at a woman who had unknowingly become the brightest part of his entire week, knowing that the truth he was about to tell her might be the very thing that took her away from him. What Romaine didn't know yet was that the deal that destroyed Mercer Capital Partners wasn't just bad luck or bad timing. It went deeper than that, and the man who knew the real truth had been quietly carrying that secret inside Castellan and Vance for almost a decade. His name was Henrik Larsson, the company's longtime head of logistics, a tall, soft-spoken man originally from Denmark who had worked under Desmond Castellan since the company was half its current size. Henrik wasn't flashy. He didn't care about boardroom politics or company gossip. He cared about doing his job well and going home to his garden every evening. But Henrik had been in the room, almost 10 years ago, when the original Mercer deal had been quietly restructured behind closed doors, in a way that protected Castellan and Vance completely while leaving smaller partner firms exposed to all the risk. Henrik never spoke about it. Not because he agreed with it, but because Desmond Castellan made it very clear, without ever saying it directly, that loyal employees who valued their pensions didn't ask questions about decisions made above their pay grade. Henrik had watched Romaine grow up in that company. He had taught Romaine how to read a supply contract before Romaine even started high school. In many ways, Henrik had been more of a steady presence in Romaine's life than Desmond ever was. So when Romaine showed up at his office that same evening, looking unsettled in a way Henrik had never seen before, Henrik knew immediately that something serious was happening. "You look like a man who just found out something he didn't want to know," Henrik said, leaning back in his chair. "Henrik, I need to ask you about something. The Mercer Capital Partners deal. From years ago." What actually happened with that? Henrik went quiet for a long moment, his expression carefully unreadable, the way it always was whenever certain old names came up. "Why are you asking about that now?" Henrik asked carefully. "Because I think I might be falling for the daughter of the man whose firm got destroyed in that deal," Romaine said honestly. "And I need to understand exactly what happened before I tell her who I am." Henrik set down the pen he had been holding. He looked at Romaine for a long time, like he was weighing something heavy in his mind, deciding whether the truth would help this young man or break him completely. "Close the door," Henrik said finally. Romaine closed it. "What I'm about to tell you," Henrik said slowly, "I have never said out loud to anyone in this building. Not once in almost 10 years. Romaine sat down across from him, his heart pounding. "Mercer deal wasn't a normal business failure, Romaine," Henrik continued. "Your father restructured the risk terms 2 weeks before the deal closed, in a private meeting that almost nobody else knew about. He shifted the exposure so that if anything went wrong, the smaller partner firms would absorb almost all the damage, while Castellan and Vance walked away mostly protected." Henrik paused. Walter Mercer never saw those changes. He signed papers believing the risk was shared evenly, the way it had been explained to him originally. Romaine felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Are you telling me my father set Walter Mercer up to fail?" "I'm telling you your father protected this company the only way he knows how, by making sure somebody else always carries the weight when things go wrong," Henrik said quietly. "I should have said something back then. I told myself it wasn't my place. I've regretted that decision for a long time." Ramin sat in silence, processing everything, feeling the ground shift slightly under a life he thought he understood. "Why are you telling me now?" he asked. "Because you came in here with her name on your tongue and guilt all over your face," Henrik said. "And because somebody in this family needs to finally do the right thing. It might as well be you." Octavia, meanwhile, had no idea any of this was happening behind the scenes. All she knew was that the man who had been showing up every week with terrible jokes and an appetite for pancakes had suddenly disappeared for almost 2 weeks straight. No call. No message. Nothing. Her cousin Talisha, loud, dramatic, and never one to hold back an opinion, was sitting across from her at Octavia's kitchen table that weekend, shaking her head slowly. "I knew it," Talisha said. "I told you, didn't I?" Rich man shows up out of nowhere, charms you with pancakes and good manners, then disappears the second things start feeling real. Classic. "You don't know that's what happened," Octavia said, though her voice didn't sound very convinced of her own defense. "Octavia, baby, when has a man in a coat that nice ever stuck around for a woman working double shifts at a diner? I'm just saying, protect your heart. These men come from a different planet than us." Octavia stirred her coffee slowly, staring down at it like it might give her an answer. He didn't seem like that, though. He helped an old man on the street without even thinking about it. He listens when I talk. He remembers things I mention, even small stuff. Where is he now? Talisha asked, raising an eyebrow. Octavia didn't have an answer for that. What she didn't know was that, at that exact moment, 3 miles away, Romain was standing outside his father's enormous house, finally ready to confront the man who had built an empire on a foundation that someone else had been forced to pay for. Desmond Castellan's house sat on a hill overlooking the city, the kind of house with a long driveway and a view that made you feel small just looking at it. Romain hadn't planned on coming here tonight, but after his conversation with Henrik, he couldn't sit still. He needed answers, straight from the man responsible. Desmond was in his study when Romain walked in without knocking, a glass of dark liquor in his hand, the fireplace crackling behind him. Romain, this is a surprise. Desmond's tone was calm, almost amused. Couldn't this have waited until Monday? I talked to Henrik today, Romain said, his voice steady despite the storm building inside him. About the Mercer Capital Partners deal. Amusement on Desmond's face disappeared instantly, replaced by something much more controlled, much colder. That deal is ancient history, Desmond said, setting his glass down slowly. Why are you digging up things that don't matter anymore? Because it matters to the woman I've been spending time with, Romain said. Her name is Octavia Mercer. Her father is Walter Mercer, the man whose firm you destroyed. Desmond's expression flickered just for a moment, something almost like recognition passing through his eyes before the cold control returned. I didn't destroy anything, Desmond said evenly. Business has risk. Walter Mercer knew that when he signed the agreement. Didn't know the terms had been changed without his knowledge, Romain said. Henrik told me everything. You restructured the risk 2 weeks before closing, and he never saw it. Henrik, Desmond repeated quietly, like he was filing that name away for later, in a way that made something uneasy stir in Romain's chest. Henrik should be more careful about which conversations he decides to have. Don't, Romain said sharply. Don't even think about doing anything to him because he finally told the truth. Desmond studied his son for a long moment, his jaw tight, his eyes calculating something Romain couldn't quite read. Me explain something to you, son, Desmond said slowly. This company did not become what it is today by carrying everyone else's risk on our shoulders. We protect what's ours first. That's not cruelty. That's survival. If you plan on running this company one day, you need to understand that lesson, because the world will eat you alive if you don't. If I don't want to run a company built on a lesson like that, Romain asked quietly. Something shifted in Desmond's face, a flash of something that almost looked like fear, quickly buried under his usual composure. Then I suppose we'll have a very different conversation about your future here, Desmond said coldly. Think very carefully about what you're about to do, Romain. Because once you tell that girl who you are and what this family did to hers, there is no taking it back. And if you choose her family's feelings over this company's reputation, you will be choosing to walk away from everything I built for you. Romain stood there for a long moment, the fire crackling between them, the weight of an entire empire sitting heavy on one decision. I already know what I'm choosing, Romain said quietly. I just came here to give you the chance to make this right before I do it myself. Desmond didn't answer. He simply turned back toward the fireplace, his silence saying everything his words refused to. Romain walked out without looking back. Next morning, Octavia was wiping down the counter at Sunrise Diner when the bell above the door rang. She looked up, expecting another regular customer, and froze when she saw Romain standing there, looking like he hadn't slept in days, his eyes carrying something heavy that hadn't been there before. You disappeared for 2 weeks, Octavia said carefully, setting down her cloth. No call, no text, nothing. I know, I'm sorry. There's something I need to tell you, and I should have told you a long time ago. Romain took a breath, his hands slightly unsteady at his sides. My full name is Romain Castellan. Octavia's expression didn't change at first, like the name simply hadn't registered yet. Castellan, she repeated slowly. Then her eyes widened just slightly as the pieces started clicking together in her mind, fast and sharp, like a door slamming shut somewhere deep inside her chest. As in Castellan and Vance. Yes, Romain said quietly. The diner suddenly felt very small. Octavia's hands had gone completely still on the counter, her face draining of all the warmth that had been there just moments before. Telling me, Octavia said slowly, her voice trembling slightly with something between disbelief and rising anger, that the man who's been sitting in my diner every single week, eating pancakes, asking about my day, is the son of the company that destroyed my father's entire life. Octavia. Did you know? She asked sharply, cutting him off. From the very beginning, did you know who I was? No, I swear to you I didn't know until 2 weeks ago. My sister found old company files and recognized your last name. Romaine's voice was pleading now. Octavia, I came here because I wanted to tell you the truth before you found out some other way. I talked to someone at the company who told me everything that actually happened to your father's firm. It wasn't just bad luck. My father. Stop. Octavia's voice cracked slightly, and she pressed her hand against the counter like she needed it to stay standing. I need you to leave, right now. Octavia, please, just let me explain everything. My father lost his house, Romaine, Octavia said, her voice shaking now, years of buried pain rushing to the surface all at once. He lost his clients, his savings, his pride. I watched him sit at a kitchen table for hours, just staring at nothing, because your family's company destroyed everything he spent 20 years building. And you've been sitting in my diner this whole time, laughing with me, letting me think you were just some regular guy who happened to care. Do care, Romaine said quietly, desperately. That part was never a lie. Octavia shook her head slowly, tears she refused to let fall burning at the corners of her eyes. I need you to leave, she repeated, quieter this time, but somehow even harder to hear. Please. Ramin stood there for a moment longer, every part of him wanting to stay, wanting to fix this somehow, but he could see in her eyes that nothing he said right now was going to reach her. So he turned slowly and walked out of Sunrise Diner, the bell above the door ringing behind him one last time. Octavia stood frozen behind the counter long after he was gone, staring at the empty booth where he used to sit, feeling like the ground beneath her had just been pulled away completely. What neither of them knew yet was that Desmond Castellan had no intention of simply letting this conversation end quietly. And the next move he was about to make would threaten far more than just his son's relationship. It would threaten everything Henrik Larsson had spent almost 30 years building, and put the one person who had finally told the truth directly in danger of losing it all. If your heart is in pieces right now, you are not alone. Drop a comment, and let me know if you think Octavia should ever give Romaine a real chance to explain himself. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Henrik Larsson arrived at his office on Monday morning and found his keycard no longer worked. He stood at the glass entrance of Castellan and Vance for almost a full minute, swiping the card again and again, before a young security guard he barely recognized walked over with an apologetic look on his face. I'm sorry, Mr. Larsson. Your access was revoked over the weekend. I was told to direct you to human resources. Ramin Castellan had finally told Octavia Mercer the truth about who he really was, and watched her walk away heartbroken and furious. His father, Desmond, made it clear that there would be consequences for anyone who threatened the company's reputation. Now it looks like those consequences have already started. Stick around till the end, because there's a lesson in this story you don't want to miss. Henrik sat in a small, plain office on the 3rd floor, far from the glass walls and city views of the executives upstairs, listening to a human resources representative explain, in careful corporate language, that his position was being restructured after almost 30 years with the company. He wasn't surprised. He had expected something like this the moment he told Romaine the truth about the Mercer deal. What he hadn't expected was how calm he felt sitting there, listening to them dismantle 30 years of his life in under 10 minutes. Mr. Larsson, the representative said carefully, we want to thank you for your years of dedicated service. Desmond, he can save the script, Henrik said quietly, standing up and buttoning his coat. I know exactly why I'm sitting in this chair. He walked out of the building that morning with a small box of personal belongings and a calm sense that, whatever happened next, he had finally done the one thing he should have done 10 years earlier. He had told the truth. What Henrik didn't know yet was that Romaine had already heard what happened, less than an hour after it occurred, through a quiet phone call from a junior staff member who still respected Henrik enough to give him a warning. Romaine was sitting in his apartment, still wearing yesterday's clothes, still replaying the look on Octavia's face when she told him to leave, when his phone rang, and he learned that his father had just fired the one person who had finally been honest with him. Something inside Romaine, Something that had been bending quietly his entire life finally snapped straight. Romain walked into Castellan Tower that afternoon without an appointment, without calling ahead, straight past his father's assistant, who barely had time to stand up before he was already pushing open the door to Desmond's office. "You fired Henrik," Romain said, not bothering with a greeting. "Henrik's position was restructured," Desmond said calmly, not even looking up from the papers on his desk. "It happens. Companies evolve." After 30 years. The week after he tells me the truth about Mercer Capital Partners. Romain's voice was rising now, something he almost never allowed himself to do in front of his father. "You're punishing him for being honest. Protecting this company from people who think loyalty means less than nostalgia," Desmond said, finally looking up, his eyes hard. "Henrik made his choice. Now you need to make yours." "I already told you my choice." "Then I suggest you think about what that choice actually costs you," Desmond said, standing up slowly, walking around his desk until he was standing directly in front of his son. "Because if you go public with any of this, if you embarrass this family or this company in front of the board, the press, or anyone else, you will not be doing it as the future CEO of Castellan and Vance. You will be doing it as a man with no company, no inheritance, and no name worth anything in this industry ever again." Ramin stood there, looking at his father, a man he had spent his entire life trying to please, trying to live up to, trying to make proud. And for the first time, he realized that the price of that approval had always been his own conscience, and he simply wasn't willing to keep paying it. "Then I guess that's the choice I'm making," Romain said quietly. "Because I'd rather have nothing with a clear conscience than everything you built on somebody else's ruin." He turned and walked out, leaving his father standing alone in an office that suddenly felt much colder than the city outside. The annual Castellan and Vance shareholder meeting was scheduled for that Thursday, a polished, carefully rehearsed event held in the company's largest conference hall downtown, with board members, investors, and several local business journalists in attendance. It was the kind of event where everything was supposed to go exactly according to script. Romain made sure it didn't. He requested time on the agenda 2 days before the meeting, officially listed as an update on company transparency initiatives. Vague enough that nobody questioned it, including his father, who assumed his son was simply trying to repair his public image after weeks of distracted, distant behavior. When Romain stood up at the podium that Thursday morning, in front of the entire board, a room full of investors, and 3 local journalists with their notepads ready, Desmond Castellan sat near the front, watching his son with a calm, confident expression that slowly began to falter the moment Romain started speaking. "Years ago," Romain began, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "this company entered a partnership deal with a small firm called Mercer Capital Partners. That deal was restructured 2 weeks before closing, shifting almost all the financial risk onto our smaller partner without their full knowledge or consent. When that deal collapsed, Castellan and Vance walked away largely protected. Mercer Capital Partners did not survive." A murmur moved through the room. Desmond's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. "Not standing up here today to ask for anyone's forgiveness," Romain continued. "I'm standing up here because this company has built part of its success on a practice that protects itself by quietly shifting risk onto smaller partners who trust us to deal with them honestly. That is not sustainable, and more importantly, it is not right." One of the journalists was already writing quickly, her pen moving fast across her notepad. "Effective immediately, I am proposing a full, independent review of every partnership agreement this company has closed in the last 15 years, with a public commitment to fairly compensate any partner firm that was harmed by similar practices, starting with Mercer Capital Partners." Romain looked directly at his father for the first time since starting. "I'm also recommending the reinstatement of Henrik Larsson, whose 30 years of honest service to this company should never have ended the way it did." The room had gone completely silent now, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. Desmond stood up slowly, his voice tight with controlled anger. "This is not the appropriate venue for personal grievances, Romain." "This is exactly the venue, Dad," Romain said calmly. "Because the people in this room deserve to know what kind of company they're invested in." A long moment, nobody in the room moved. Then, slowly, one of the older board members, a quiet woman named Patricia Whitfield who had been with the company even longer than Desmond, stood up. "Have wondered about that Mercer deal for years," she said simply. "I think it's time we finally looked into it properly." By one, a few more board members nodded in agreement, and Romain felt, for the first time in his life, like the ground beneath his feet was something he had built himself, rather than something handed to him. Desmond sat back down slowly, the color draining slightly from his face, realizing in that moment that he had lost control of a room for the first time in over 20 years. The story made it into the local business section the following morning. A measured, factual piece about Castellan and Vance launching, an internal review following questions about past partnership practices. It wasn't a scandal exactly. The article was careful and professional, but it was enough. Octavia read it sitting at her kitchen table, her coffee going cold in front of her, Talisha leaning over her shoulder reading the same article twice. "He actually did it," Talisha said quietly, genuinely surprised. "He stood up in front of his whole company and said all that." Octavia didn't say anything for a long moment, just stared at her father's name printed in black and white in a real newspaper for the first time in years, not as a cautionary tale, but as someone who deserved an apology. That evening, there was a knock at her apartment door. When she opened it, Walter Mercer was standing there, holding a folded piece of paper in his hands, his eyes red like he had been crying. "Dad," Octavia said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "How did you even?" "He came to see me first," Walter said quietly, stepping inside. "Romain, 2 days ago, before any of this happened in the papers. He drove all the way to Asheville to apologize to me in person, face to face, before he ever stood up in front of his board." Octavia felt something tighten in her chest. "He didn't tell me that." "Don't think he wanted credit for it," Walter said, handing her the folded paper. "He gave me this. Said it was the least he could do, and that whatever I decided to do with it was completely up to me." Octavia unfolded the paper slowly. It was a formal letter from Castellan and Vance's legal department, outlining a financial settlement for Mercer Capital Partners, an amount that would never undo 8 years of struggle, but was enough to finally give her father some real breathing room, some real dignity back. "He didn't have to do any of this," Walter said quietly, sitting down at her small kitchen table. "He could have stayed quiet, protected his own future. Instead, he chose to lose almost everything just to make this right." Octavia sat down across from her father, the letter still in her hands, her mind racing through weeks of anger and hurt, all of it slowly mixing with something else now, something that felt dangerously close to hope. "I told him to leave my diner and never come back," Octavia admitted quietly. "I know," Walter said gently. "He told me that too." He reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. "Octavia, I spent years blaming myself for what happened to us, for trusting the wrong people, for not protecting our family better. But watching that young man stand in front of his entire company and admit what his father did, knowing it could cost him everything, that's not something a guilty man does to win a woman back. That's something a man does because he actually believes it's right." Octavia sat in silence for a long time, staring at the letter, thinking about every pancake breakfast, every easy laugh, every small moment that had felt real, even after everything she now knew. 3 days later, Octavia found herself standing outside Castellan Tower, a building she once swore she would only ever look at with hatred, now staring up at it with a different kind of nervous energy entirely. She found Romain in the lobby, looking tired but lighter somehow, like a man who had finally set down something he had been carrying his entire life. "You drove to Asheville," Octavia said, walking up to him. Romain turned, surprise flashing across his face before settling into something quieter, something cautiously hopeful. "I did. You didn't tell me. I wasn't doing it to win you back," Romain said honestly. "I was doing it because it was the right thing to do, whether you ever spoke to me again or not." Octavia studied him for a long moment, the same way she had studied him on that cold street corner months ago, trying to figure out exactly what kind of man was standing in front of her. "My father said you gave up almost everything," she said quietly. "I gave up a company built on something I couldn't live with anymore," Romain said. "I didn't give up who I actually am. If anything, I think I just found that for the first time." Octavia felt the last of her guarded walls finally start to crack, not because he had money, not because he had given her father a settlement, but because he had chosen honesty even when it cost him everything, exactly the same way she had knelt down for a stranger in the middle of a busy street without thinking twice about what it might cost her. "I'm still angry," Octavia said honestly. "About all of it, about how long it took to find out the truth." "You have every right to be," Romaine said. "I'm not asking you to forget any of that. I'm just asking for a chance to show you who I actually am without my father's name attached to it." Octavia was quiet for a long moment, the lobby bustling quietly around them, two people standing in the middle of everything, exactly the way they had stood in the middle of a busy street the very first time they met. "Sunrise Diner," she said finally. "Friday morning, same booth." A small, genuine smile broke across Romaine's face. "I'll be there." "Be late," Octavia said, already turning to leave, though she couldn't quite hide her own smile either. Months later, Castellan and Vance completed its full independent review, ultimately compensating 11 different partner firms that had been harmed by similar past practices, including Mercer Capital Partners. Henrik Larsson returned to the company, not in his old position, but as the newly appointed head of an internal ethics and fairness division, a role created specifically because of everything that had happened. Desmond Castellan stepped back from daily operations not long after, the company's leadership slowly shifting toward Romaine, who insisted on doing things differently this time, with full transparency. Even when it was uncomfortable, even when it cost the company short-term profit, Walter Mercer eventually opened a small consulting practice of his own, helping other small firms understand the fine print of major partnership deals, determined to make sure nobody else got caught the way he did. And Octavia, she still works at Sunrise Diner, though these days, it's mostly because she genuinely loves the work and the people there, not because she has to. The broken neon sign finally got fixed last spring. Some Friday mornings, you can still find a certain booth in the corner occupied by the same two people, pancakes between them, laughing about something small, the kind of small moment that somehow built into something much bigger than either of them expected. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's this: the truth always costs something. But the cost of silence, the cost of letting somebody else carry the weight of your mistakes, is always so much higher in the end. Real strength isn't found in protecting your name at all costs. It's found in being willing to lose everything for the sake of doing what's right. If this story touched you, let us know in the comments which moment hit you the hardest. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that honesty is always worth the risk. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications, because we have so many more stories like this one coming your way. Thank you for watching till the very end. We'll see you in the next story.